7:23 a.m., February 17th, 2026. Tucson, Arizona. 4 unmarked vehicles turned off East Grant Road and entered the parking structure of Southern Arizona Regional Medical Center. They'd been staged at a federal facility 12 miles away since 5:45 a.m. No sirens, no marked units. Standard civilian plates on all 4. Estimated classified material value, $76, $6 billion. That number belongs to the Virginia-class and Columbia-class submarine reauthorization contract, the largest naval procurement package in modern American history. The technical schematics that disappeared from Naval Station Norfolk in March 2007 were part of that program: propulsion system architecture, reactor configuration, acoustic suppression profiles designed to make a 377-foot attack submarine effectively invisible underwater. The man who copied those files walked off the base 19 years ago and never came back. Until this morning. He was at his workstation on the 3rd floor of the hospital's IT department. Scheduled shift, 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Badge number 4471. Employee name on file, David Marlowe. Date of hire, September 14th, 2009. Performance reviews, consistently satisfactory. No disciplinary incidents. No red flags. No reason for anyone at this hospital to look twice. The name Daniel Marsh appeared nowhere in the hospital system. It hadn't appeared in any public record for nearly 2 decades. But it was the name on an active federal arrest warrant, sitting in an NCIS database since September 2007, waiting. This is the story of how that warrant survived longer than the conspiracy it was meant to close. The Naval Station Norfolk security audit that started everything began as routine administrative procedure. A mandatory quarterly review of access logs on restricted network servers. The kind that generates hundreds of flag reports every cycle, most resolved within days as clerical errors or protocol violations. The flag that appeared on March 4th, 2007 was not a clerical error. Server Cluster 7, restricted access tier, held technical documentation for the Virginia-class submarine program. The flagged package included propulsion architecture schematics, acoustic dampening system specs, and reactor compartment layout files. Someone had accessed this cluster 18 times over a 14-month period using legitimate credentials. Someone had also activated a network-connected storage device during 6 of those sessions, a violation the access log captured, but the oversight system had failed to escalate. The credentials belonged to Daniel Marsh, systems engineer, GS-11 civilian contractor, clearance level, secret. Access granted under a 2004 subcontractor agreement between the Navy and a Northern Virginia defense technology firm. By the time the security audit report reached the NCIS duty officer, Marsh had not shown up to work for 3 days. His supervisor assumed illness. HR had received nothing. When the NCIS agent assigned to the initial inquiry drove to the address on file, a rented townhouse in Virginia Beach, the landlord confirmed the tenant had vacated. Quietly, quickly, taking only what fit in a car. The file was open, the warrant was issued, and Daniel Marsh was gone. NCIS took primary jurisdiction. In its early months, the investigation ran across several fronts at once. Digital forensics on the server cluster, full background review of Marsh's employment history, going back to his original clearance application in 2001, interviews with co-workers, supervisors, and the 2 subcontractor firms he'd worked through during his time at the base. What they found in the access logs was incomplete but damaging. 6 sessions where a storage device had been connected. Transfer volumes suggesting partial extraction. Not the entire documentation package, but significant chunks of specific subsystems. The propulsion and acoustic suppression files appeared to be the primary targets. The reactor compartment schematics showed partial extraction, somewhere between 40 and 60% of available files by forensic estimates. The critical gap was the destination. NCIS could document that files had been copied. They could not document where those copies had gone. Marsh's workstation showed signs of deliberate data sanitization. His home had been cleared. His personal devices were never recovered. The investigation identified a secondary email account, registered under a variation of his name. Active during the same 14-month window the access logs covered. That account had been deleted. Recovery efforts retrieved fragments. Not enough. What fragments they did recover pointed toward a contact outside the United States, a routing path through servers in 3 different countries. Germany was one of them. Austria was another. The technical trail ended in Vienna. The name attached to that endpoint was not identified in 2007. NCIS documented the Vienna connection, flagged it for counterintelligence review, and kept building the domestic case against Marsh. The problem was that the domestic case required finding Marsh. He had used his real name and real social security number for the last time in February 2007. After that, nothing. No tax filings, no driver's license renewal, no bank accounts, no credit activity. He had prepared for this. The security audit had caught his access pattern, but he had apparently anticipated that possibility. 14 months of file extraction had been methodical, not rushed. The departure from the Virginia Beach townhouse was equally deliberate. Landlord paid through the end of the lease, no forwarding address. One detail stuck. The landlord mentioned Marsh had left behind a single cardboard box in the garage. Inside were about 30 pounds of shredded paper. He'd shredded documents on site before leaving. Whatever paper trail he was cutting, he cut it himself. I spent considerable time going through the fragmentary NCIS records from 2007 and 2008, and one detail kept coming back. The case file notes, in what reads as standard analytical language, that Marsh had demonstrated above-average operational security awareness for a non-intelligence community subject. That phrase is bureaucratic understatement. What it actually means is that a systems engineer with no known intelligence training successfully evaded federal detection for nearly 2 decades. The investigation reached what the case file describes as a reduced resource phase in October 2008. No confirmed sightings. No financial activity under any known alias. No indication of foreign travel. The Vienna connection had been passed to counterintelligence channels and logged. The domestic manhunt had produced nothing actionable. The file was not closed. Federal arrest warrants don't expire, but the active resources assigned to the case were reallocated. The investigation was, in practical terms, dormant. For 17 years. What's most surprising about this case isn't that Marsh evaded detection for 19 years. People disappear. They build new lives under new names. What's most surprising is the mechanism that finally found him. A fingerprint enrolled in a federal travel convenience program, matched against a 19-year-old security clearance file through a database cross-reference that nobody specifically ordered. The reauthorization of the Virginia and Columbia-class submarine contract in late 2025 generated significant congressional attention and media coverage. The $76, $6 billion figure entered public discussion. It also triggered a mandatory counterintelligence review, standard procedure for major defense program reauthorizations. That review required NCIS to assess whether any unresolved security incidents connected to either program represented ongoing risk. The initial phase was automated, algorithms scanning dormant case files against current database holdings, checking names against federal record systems. The sweep flagged several cases for renewed human review. Case 2007, NCIS, NAN 0041C was one of them. The flag was narrow. The algorithm had identified a biometric partial match, not a confirmed identification, but a statistical correlation high enough to require analyst review. The source, a TSA PreCheck enrollment record from August 2019. Name on the enrollment, David Marlowe. Employer listed, Southern Arizona Regional Medical Center, Tucson, Arizona. The fingerprint in the PreCheck record matched the fingerprint in Daniel Marsh's original 2007 security clearance file at 14 points of correspondence. 14 points isn't a courtroom-ready standard in all jurisdictions, but it was enough for the NCIS analyst to escalate to a supervisor, and enough for that supervisor to request a full identity comparison from the FBI's biometric division. The full comparison, completed in November 2025, extended the match to 22 points across the right index and right thumb. The man living as David Marlowe in Tucson, Arizona, was Daniel Marsh. The team that built the 2026 operational plan was larger than the one that had worked the original 2007 investigation. NCIS retained primary case ownership. The U.S. Marshals Service was brought in as the executing agency. It maintains jurisdiction over warrant service regardless of case age. FBI counterintelligence was added because of the foreign handler component, the Vienna connection that had never been resolved. Serving an arrest warrant on a hospital IT employee required planning that went beyond simple physical logistics. Marsh worked in a secure IT environment with access to the hospital's entire network infrastructure. The team needed to assess whether he could destroy evidence or send external communications from his workstation, and whether those communications could compromise anything connected to the original case. The assessment concluded that the risk was manageable, but not negligible. His role as an IT administrator gave him elevated access to the hospital's internal systems. As far as investigators could determine, he had no connection to any current foreign intelligence operation. The Vienna handler's network had been dismantled by German domestic intelligence in 2019. But the team did not want Marsh to have warning time. Operational security for the February 2026 warrant service was maintained at a small group level. The hospital administration was not notified in advance. The IT department supervisor was not contacted. The plan was to enter during normal business hours, move to the third floor, and approach Marsh's workstation directly. In the 72 hours before the operation, surveillance teams confirmed his daily pattern. He arrived at 6:58 a.m. on Monday, 7:02 a.m. on Tuesday, 6:55 a.m. on Wednesday. He entered through the hospital's East Staff entrance, badged in at the stairwell door on level 3, and was at his workstation within 4 minutes of entry. He didn't stop at the cafeteria. He didn't linger in common areas. The pattern was consistent, and it told the team exactly where he would be. Put yourself in the position of the US Marshal who walked through that hospital entrance at 7:23 a.m. You're serving a 19-year-old warrant on a man who has successfully evaded federal detection for longer than some of your colleagues have been in law enforcement. You don't know with certainty what he'll do when he sees you. You know he planned carefully in 2007. You don't know what he's planned since. 12 agents and marshals were involved in the February 17th operation. 8 were positioned inside the hospital, 2 on each floor near stairwell exits, 2 in the IT department corridor, 2 for direct approach. 4 remained outside in vehicles. The approach team reached the IT department at 7:31 a.m., 8 minutes after entry. Marsh was at his workstation, headphones on. He was running a scheduled backup routine, the kind of task an IT administrator handles at the start of a shift before the workday generates network traffic. He didn't hear the door open. The first indication he had that anything was happening was when the marshal to his left addressed him by his original name. Not David Marlowe, Daniel Marsh. He turned. He saw the badges. He saw the document. He did not run. He did not reach for anything. He sat in his chair for approximately 4 seconds. The agents noted this in their reports. And then he stood, placed his hands behind his back, and said nothing. The hospital was not evacuated. No other staff member was detained. The arrest was completed without incident in under 6 minutes from first contact. Marsh was transported from the hospital in an unmarked vehicle. His workstation was secured. His access credentials immediately revoked by a technical agent who had been given remote system access by the US Marshals Digital Forensics Unit. Access obtained without alerting hospital IT management. The 19-year-old warrant had been served. The work that came after was in some ways more complicated than the arrest itself. FBI counterintelligence had maintained a parallel track of the Vienna connection since inheriting the referral from NCIS in 2008. The handler identified through fragmentary 2007 digital evidence had never been publicly named. The BfV, German domestic intelligence, had dismantled a communications network in Vienna in 2019 linked to Russian foreign intelligence operations in Western Europe. One node of that network matched the routing profile documented in the 2007 NCIS investigation. The individual associated with that node had left Austria in 2018. His current location was not confirmed in any US government database as of the time of Marsh's arrest. That meant the buyer, if transmission had been completed, was already gone. The network that might have used the submarine schematics had been rolled up by a foreign intelligence service 7 years before Marsh was arrested. The warrant had outlasted the conspiracy on both ends, the contractor who stole the files and the handler who was supposed to receive them. What had actually been transmitted remained an open question. The fragmentary 2007 digital evidence showed partial extraction of propulsion and acoustic suppression files. It showed routing through servers in Germany and Austria. It did not definitively show a completed transfer. Forensic analysis of Marsh's hospital workstation and personal devices, seized under a search warrant obtained the morning of the arrest, would take months to complete. Here's the take that'll probably draw some disagreement. The 19-year gap between the original warrant and its service is not primarily a failure of law enforcement resources. It's a failure of database architecture. The biometric match that cracked this case in 2025 could have been run in 2019 when Marsh enrolled in TSA PreCheck. The enrollment database existed. The clearance file existed. The connection between them required a counterintelligence sweep that nobody ran until a $76. $6 billion contract reauthorization made it procedurally mandatory. That's a systemic problem that this one arrest does not fix. What do you think? If the systems had been connected in 2019, does 6 extra years of exposure to the US air travel network represent a real security gap? Or is the classified damage already done by the time someone enrolls in a federal travel program under a false name? The preliminary forensic review of Marsh's hospital workstation found nothing connected to classified materials. His personal laptop, recovered from his apartment, also in Tucson, under the name David Marlowe, showed encrypted partition structures. The contents of those partitions were under analysis. His apartment contained no physical documentation of federal employment, security clearance history, or military base access. He had maintained the cover for nearly 2 decades with apparent consistency. Hospital colleagues interviewed by FBI agents in the days following the arrest described him as professional, competent, private. He had not formed close personal relationships at the hospital. He did not attend staff social events. He lived alone. By every visible measure, he had simply become a different person. The arraignment took place on February 20th, 2026, in federal court in Arizona. Marsh was charged under 18 U.S.C. Section 794, gathering or delivering defense information to aid a foreign government, and under additional counts related to unauthorized computer access and obstruction. He was held without bail. The government argued, successfully, that 19 years of sustained identity concealment demonstrated that no supervision condition would adequately address flight risk. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The case federal prosecutors were building as of spring 2026 faced a specific evidentiary challenge the original 2007 investigation had not resolved, proving completed transmission rather than completed copying. The access logs from Naval Station Norfolk documented extraction. The Vienna routing evidence documented an outbound path. The gap between those two data points, whether the files arrived, whether they were received, whether they were used, remained contested. The prosecution's position, as described in court filings, was that the act of unauthorized extraction and attempted transmission was sufficient for conviction under the applicable statute, regardless of whether transmission was confirmed complete. Defense motions challenged the sufficiency of the digital evidence and the 19-year chain of custody for the original server logs. NCIS had maintained the original forensic images from the 2007 server cluster. Chain of custody documentation covered the intervening period. The defense challenge on that point was expected to be resolved in the government's favor during pretrial proceedings. The Vienna handler was a separate problem. Extradition was not being actively pursued as of the public record available in mid-2026 because the handler's confirmed current location remained uncertain. BfV had shared intelligence about the 2019 network dismantlement, but the individual at the center of that referral had not been charged in Germany or Austria, and his whereabouts after leaving Vienna in 2018 were unknown to publicly reported investigation. There's a line in the indictment that reads almost like an annotation from a different era. The government's description of the classified materials allegedly transmitted refers to propulsion architecture specifications relevant to submarine programs then under active development. That language, then under active development, captures something about the temporal dimension of this case. The Virginia-class boats that Marsh's stolen files related to are now commissioned and operational. The acoustic suppression systems whose specifications he allegedly copied are deployed. If those specifications were received and used by a foreign intelligence service, the damage existed in a period that predates the ship's commissioning. The Navy's assessment of actual operational impact, whether the transmission meaningfully compromised the submarines, was classified. That assessment would inform sentencing if conviction occurred, but it would not be part of the public record. The counterintelligence review triggered by the 2025 contract reauthorization did not stop with the Marsh case. The sweep that ran the biometric cross-reference on dormant NCIS cases flagged 14 other files for renewed analyst review. 11 were resolved as non-matches or insufficient evidence. 2 remained under active review as of the publicly available reporting window. 1 had a foreign routing profile with structural similarities to the Vienna connection in the Marsh case. The Southern Arizona Regional Medical Center issued a statement following the arrest confirming that it had cooperated fully with federal law enforcement and had no prior knowledge of the employee's true identity or background. The hospital's security protocols for IT administrator hiring, which relied on background check vendors rather than federal clearance databases, were under internal review. Marsh's neighbors in Tucson described him as quiet, reliable, the kind of person you notice only when they're gone. He had worked at the hospital for 16 years. He managed network infrastructure for a regional medical system, administered patient records databases, supervised IT staff, responded to system failures. He attended no federal proceedings, no base reunions, no events connected to his previous life. He had built a second life so complete that the only thing capable of finding him was a database query that hadn't existed in the form it existed in 2025 when he disappeared. The warrant is served. The case is in court. The handler's location remains unknown. If the files were transmitted and received, and if they were used, the people who used them have had 19 years with the information. The warrant outlasted the conspiracy. Whether justice catches up to everything, the conspiracy set in motion is a different question, and one the public record cannot yet answer. Subscribe to Cold Warrant. The next file we're opening has a different kind of handler and a different kind of network. It was hiding in plain sight for even longer.